Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for being here from the very beginning. We have here for 5 more days, and the last day, Sangeeta is going to be leading the conversation, but you're going to see me here for the 5 days. And so I know that it's a very demanded course, and before I go ahead, I would like you to raise your hand, those of you here in the room who are social scientists, who are economists, political scientists, public policy, raise your hands. International relationships, okay, okay. Not all of you. Okay, so who of you are natural scientists, biologists, ecologists, engineers? No? One, yeah? Two, more, no more? Okay, I just want to make sure that we have we are reaching out to the natural scientists. In the university where I work these days, in the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, as the name says, it is very focused on agriculture and forest in the land sciences. And I have a lot of conversations with colleagues in there and students who are not economists, who hate economics. So I have developed certain skills to, I think, communicate even better what I do. And I really appreciate those conversations because I think they have made me clearer. Here is the first assignment. I want you to start thinking as we move, what will be your discrete choice experiment? Hopefully by the end of the week, you can provide a very basic design of a discrete choice experiment. Just for you to know, that is at the beginning of December, I went to Morocco to the UM6P, and we did that also in a 4-day course. And by then, the students were able, most of them, to present some design of discrete choice experiment that they thought were interesting. And what I will think that is the main key question here for you to answer to yourself is, what will be the topic where you want to provide an informed insight? I know that several of you are PhD students. I know that several of you are already PhDs and are professors, or several of you are already researchers. What will be the topic? What will be the question that if you were able to provide certain insights, the policymaker or the innovator or your own enterprise could take off, right? And we are going to be talking about examples. Don't you worry. But I would like you to actively be thinking on that through the entire 5 days. And hopefully you will have specific questions. You are welcome to raise your hand as we move. And you say, well, you know, I was thinking in this topic, and I was thinking that my attribute could be this. What do you think? And then we all try to provide feedback. I tend to be very engage with the students and give the word to you because, as you may guess, talking for 3 hours straight gets tiring. So I need you to talk a little bit as well. So don't shy away from participating. During the presentations, it was said that the choices are discrete. And if you think about it, I started getting interested in this topic when I realized that even when most of our analysis and most of our theory kind of focus on continuous decisions, right? Or we model it as if we could buy fractions of a car. We really, if you think about it, most of our decisions are discrete. Either you buy a car or you don't. Right? Either you buy your iPad or you don't. Either you take a trip or not. You decide to invest on energy efficiency or not. Decide to implement a new technology in your farm or not. We are really surrounded by discrete decisions. Some of them are actually you have to decide among multiple options, not only between one or other. But for instance, when it comes to choice of transportation, you could decide between going by bike, going by bus, going by metro, taking the car, calling an Uber. And those are also discrete choices from which you have to take different multiple options, right? It's not only one or the other. Those are very easy examples. But at the same time, those examples I am giving you are the decisions that we take as individuals. The farmer takes a decision as a producer of implementing or not a technology. You and I take a decision of how to commute to school individually. And discrete choice experiments are about exploring the preferences of those individuals, either as consumers or as commuters in this case, or as producers in the case of the farmers, or as I mentioned in Sweden these days, the case of the forest owners is a stakeholder group that I am very interested these days. And remember, the name of the course is From Preferences to Public Policy. So the key point here is going to be, we are going to be exploring preferences of potential users, end users. I'm going to be calling them end users in general. Either they are going to be producers or they are going to be consumers. And that is usually where you see that the applications of papers end. Well, we explore these preferences, and it turns out people prefer this over this. The key element of this course that I hope it will be engaging for you is, how do we generate policy implications? And the key is aggregation. I can be exploring your preferences, and then it turns out your preferences are different than your preferences. We are going to be discussing that. By the end, the point to take it to the public policy is, how do you aggregate those preferences? Because that is going to be the key component for policymakers, right? They are going to be like, sure, okay, well, some people like this, some people like that. What do I do with that? And then, very importantly, when you aggregate preferences, you will realize, oh, there are some people who are going to be losing if we implement a recommended policy, because according to my discrete choice experiment, some people dislike what I am suggesting. That is one powerful element of the discrete choice experiments. You can document the proportion of your respondents who not only don't like it, but dislike it. You come, and I always say this to the students in the natural sciences, because as I said, they are the ones who, one, don't like too much what I do to begin with, and two, they think that they have this beautiful solution to the problems of the humanity, to climate change. And then I tell them, I dare you to go and implement a discrete choice experiment so that you quantify the number of people who are interested, but more importantly, the number of people who actually dislike your solution. And they think, well, how will they dislike my solution if it solves the problem? Well, usually what happens is, even we in the social sciences are thinking on solving a problem from a technical point of view, or as economists, from a optimal Pareto efficiente point of view. But guess what? Our fellow citizens, our fellow colleagues, our fellow classmates, for whatever reason, may not like our beautiful solution. And that is what this instrument is about. You have something that you want to test, and you want to know how much they like it, how much they dislike it. And then you have to do something with that, and that's where we are going to end up aggregating preferences. Okay. I hope that you are following me and that I am being clear. I am about to start with the slides and go a little bit more into detail, but I really like to start with this kind of general introduction, general conversation, so that I set the table from the very beginning. And one thing I like to say within the first 20, 30 minutes of the presentations is the limitation of these methods. So that I get it out, right? Just get it out, there is a limitation, everything has a limitation, let's discuss it, let's say it, you write it down, and then I say the typical, well, but we are not going to cover that in these 5 days, later on you will have to deal with that. But it's an introductory type of course. It's an intensive, and I aim for you to learn to do a discrete choice experiment to test your first to take your first steps towards designing a discrete choice experiment. So I am not going to spend too much time on the limitations, but it's a good idea to set them up front, because I already talked, and we already talked a lot about the beauty, but let's always try to be a little bit more balanced. There is one important limitation, not only of discrete choice experiments, but of non-market valuation methods. I am going to discuss it later on, but discrete choice experiment is a type of general methods that are called non-market valuation that deal with the values of services or goods that are yet to be in the market, right? That they don't have a market, they exist, or they are there, but they don't have a market, or that we are thinking about them and they don't have a market yet. There are contingent valuation, there are discrete choice experiments in the stated preference side of the equation. And in the revealed preferences, we have hedonic prices and travel cost. All these methods have one little problem, which is they really are partial equilibrium models. What do I mean by that? You will see in one of the examples I'm about to present. We ask our respondents in our surveys, how much will you pay if in increasing bill of the electricity if the electricity came from a renewable source? We have done that in Mexico. They do a lot in USA and in Europe. And then imagine that they come out with a number, $5 per kilowatt, I will be willing to pay. And then you go and really take very seriously and put in context how much that $5 is. You say it seems reasonable. I'm going to communicate it to the corresponding authority of the energy agency. You do your policy recommendations and everything. The main assumption in these models is that that's the only market that changes in a moment. That there is no general equilibrium considerations to consider. Because once that market changes, right, the complements and the substitutes are going to change, and then there is going to be all the chain of events that we already know as very good economists we are. And then in the end, there are going to be other effects in other markets that may end up impacting how much you really are willing to pay for renewable energy. But we are not able to model that with discrete choice experiments. Not that we could not. That could be a nice research agenda later on, because I have thought about it. We should be able to implement discrete choice experiment in key markets in the different sectors in the general equilibrium model, and then use them as blocks informing the general equilibrium model. But we haven't done it. So that's a research agenda that we could follow. But so far, that is something that we don't do with discrete choice experiments. You are able to inform what will happen in that specific market that you model. And whenever someone asks you, well, yeah, but what is going to happen in the general economy if this really is implemented, we get quiet. We don't have too much to say. We could say some things, and we will be discussing that later on, but that's one limitation. The other limitation, I'm going to be upfront, is that it remains hypothetical. It is a survey-based mechanism, a survey-based methodology that is going to ask people, between this and this, what will you prefer at this price? And you will see that we will make our best effort to make it incentive compatible and to make it policy consequential, which are two words that you have to remember by the end of the week. Incentive compatible, that people are incentivized to really say the truth, and policy consequentiality, that people believe that their opinions or their preferences are going to end up informing a policy. If we make those two things and we follow protocol, that's the best that we can do to argue that we are simulating a market as good as possible in the context that there is no market, because that's basically what we do. But you will hear over and over and over, and whenever you try to publish your papers, the reviewer is going to be like, this is hypothetical. I prefer reveal preferences. I prefer that you answer this question with data that is already available, because people already are reporting their preferences in those markets. So it's hypothetical. And then we also have ways to defend ourselves. But those two are big limitations in the method. And the one, of course, that I respond in terms of hypothetical nature is, well, yeah, but tell me which one to use when you are creating an innovation. There are some reveal preference methods that can be used, but sometimes there is no data. And then there is one limitation that I would like to mention also at the very beginning of the reveal preferences, that you are not going to hear that conventional econometricians say too much. Conventional econometricians love reveal preferences. They say, well, let's have the data. What the data say? Let's see the data in the market. What does it say? Any of you can think on a limitation of, for instance, the water market data. So imagine that. I'm going to give you more of the example in my country because it's the one that I know more. But I will imagine that you have a similar situation. In Mexico, we have the residential consumers and the agricultural consumers of water. And we can observe, if we are able to gather the information, how much they consume per month, in some cases per week. And we are able to observe how much they pay. And depending on the range of your consumption, the price goes from very subsidized to not so subsidized. So if you are in a low level of consumption and relatively poor, you pay very little in Mexico. And you are upper middle income class or very rich, you pay more, but still is subsidized. So imagine that you are able to access that data and you model the demand for water so that you can estimate the price elasticity for water, and therefore you can estimate how much people value 1 liter of water. What is the big problem with that data if you are interested on the value of water for people? Louder?
Like diamond water paradox. There's one paradox for diamond water.
So
the person who is not having the thing will having more preference to that. So if I have more money, so obviously I will not care about what is the price. But if I don't have, then I will care about it.
Well, that is one limitation that is rooted in the feature of the data that I would like you to identify. Not that you are wrong, but I want you to identify one feature in this data that the econometricians overlooked. Probably I didn't explain it very well, so I'm going to answer myself. The problem with this data when people model demand for water in this context, or for energy, or for whatever kind of context where there is this subsidized situation, is that we are not observing the range of prices that should be observed. The range of prices are here. You are going to be modeling the price elasticity in a subsidized market, and what you are describing happens here. In a non-subsidized market, the prices will vary like this, and therefore, you will be observing more realistic reaction to changes in prices when you calculate the elasticity, the price elasticity. So whenever, I'm going to assume that after this week, every one of you is going to do a discrete choice experiment. And whenever people tell you, well, but that is very hypothetical. One, you should not do it too hypothetical because then you are doing it wrong, for sure. But two, every time that you think on your application, think on whether there is reveal data, reveal preference data that could help you, one. And two, think whether the prices in the specific market are really covering all feasible range of values. Because if they are not, that's where discrete choice experiments come as one of those very beautiful tools that basically, through simulating the market, you could expand the range of prices in the discrete choice experiment. You will see later on in the examples, but that is one of the beauties of this method.
So, is everyone able to hear?
Oh, sorry.
Audio at the back? Yeah?
Am I speaking without the...
So, is this a mic or what? Yes, that's a mic. That's a mic?
You hear me? I usually don't use mic and I tend to yell, but if you don't hear me, I can...
Yeah. For online, this should be working.
Okay, okay, this one is working online, but then should I use this for here? Good. You should have told me before. There. Okay. So that is one of the beauties of the method. You could play with the range of prices. So you could complement revealed preferences. Not only you can use discrete choice experiments or no market valuations or stated preference methods to value things that are not in the market, but if you find contexts in which the market doesn't cover all the prices, that means that then the market is not covering all the behaviors that can potentially be observed. So the discrete choice experiment helps you to complement revealed preferences by expanding the range of prices. Okay, so that was the long introduction without a... I tend to not use too many of these because I like to talk. Anyway, so a discrete choice experiment, my definition of a discrete choice experiment that also applies for continued evaluation is a discrete choice experiment is the simulation of a market that doesn't exist, or that if it exists, you could kind of play with the range of prices. You expand the market. In order to infer what will be the value that people will attach to the good or service at hand. And I really like to use that definition because it goes into the essence. When I am talking to non-economists, I usually tell them, I know that you don't like to hear that some economists like me put value to biodiversity, to conservation. They get really mad at me. And I really like to teach to those students because they get mad at me, and I like to create passions there. But I tell them, you will not disagree that a microbiologist uses Petri dishes as their laboratory. All of you know what the Petri dish is, right? You go, you take a sample, and then you put in this kind of gel, and then you put it in the fridge, and you come back 2 days, 3 days later. You see the color, the structure of the colonies that grow. You identify the type of microbe. And then you start playing with them, no? You put a line in the middle to see how they grow, whether they grow or not. You are doing experiments. Well, the markets are the laboratory of the economist, right? Our microbes are ourselves, humans. And changes in prices are those experiments that sometimes are, or most of the times are actually exogenous to each individual, right? We don't decide most of the times when the prices are going to change. Now that Trump, I am sure that many economists are pretty happy because now that Trump is doing what he's doing, you know, he's doing an experiment for us to take advantage of, right? That's a beautiful experiment. Therefore, Mexicans, for instance, I am from Mexico, so economists in Mexico, we are thinking why we are going to be researching because he is doing, in the Petri dish, he's drawing a line in the colony. It is exogenous to the colony, it's exogenous to the Mexicans, so it's a beautiful, it's not a natural experiment, but it's a beautiful experiment. Anyway, that is the laboratory of the economist. Therefore, when we don't have markets to study the behavior of humans, we simulate them. That is discrete choice experiments. Otherwise, we don't have laboratories. Otherwise, we don't really know. That is the limitation. That is the epistemological limitation of a neoclassical economics. And that's okay. It's the same that being a microbiologist and not having a petri dish. I'm giving you tools to discuss with your biologists and ecologists colleagues, right? And that's what I tell them. After that, they remain quiet, and I'm like, I won the argument. So that is a discrete choice experiment, and that's why you should be interested in it. Because when you don't have the laboratory to study, you can create it. The other tool is contingent valuation, and I probably will talk a little bit later on about it, but you can think on discrete choice experiment as a generalization of a contingent valuation. Because in contingent valuation, usually you vary the price only. Okay. I think I talked enough without presenting you a nice example. You can see that, right? Let me see if I can do it full for the people online. Questions? Questions? There. Okay. I'd like to present this example because I'm very proud of this exercise. And I think it's easy to understand. We presented to a sample of respondents who were or are office workers in Mexico City to a discrete choice experiment that looked like this. At the beginning, we explained to them, or we asked them to kindly imagine that their employer approached them and told them that they will have the possibility to choose to go into a hybrid arrangement in which they will work 2 days a week from a shared office, not from home, from a shared office. That they will get that chance in exchange of being discounted their paycheck in those amounts. And they could choose between the distance that they will have to travel to their shared office, how much they would like to give up from their paycheck a month, and whether they wanted to have a parking place, a safe parking place or not, in the building where they will be working from the office in those 2 days. So those 2 days they will be saving their commuting time, right? And their money. And you guys who live here in New Delhi, most of you in Delhi, probably will not object that it does not seem too unfair to ask people to give up some of their paycheck in exchange of saving what they already are paying in time and money for commuting. That was the idea back then. And the reason why I'm very proud of this is because we didn't do this in the COVID-19. COVID-19 started in Mexico in February 2020. And it really didn't start in China in December 2019? We did the first round of this questionnaire in the last week of November 2019 and the first week of December 2019. And we prepared it for 6 months. So we were ahead of our times for 6 months. Later on, we linked this to COVID-19, but the original idea was, and still is, and I'm going to talk later on about it because I'm going to relate it to public policy. The original idea was, why not we try to take advantage of this type of situation, of hybrid arrangement, to make Mexico less congested? If people are interested, if employers are interested, because we have a survey on employers as well, how much interested are they? How many people will want to engage in this? And based on that, how many people will get out of commuting every day? And what will that be the impact on congestion? And why will that be the impact on pollution? And why will that be the impact on individuals' well-being and their neighborhood's well-being? That is the research agenda. We started with this. So people have to decide between how far they want their share office, whether they would like to go by bike or not, and whether they want to give up $350 or $35 a month. In this case, they can always choose neither option, which basically will mean they are perfectly fine with the option of going every day to their office. You may wonder, why is that we didn't offer them to work from home? Or you may not wonder anymore right now, right? You live COVID-19. And I am just assuming Delhi is similar to Mexico City in the fact that working from home and having Zoom meetings while the dog or the kids or your mother or your father or all those things happen, right? That was the same logic for Mexico City. Privacy, lack of internet connection, and a lot of other things make working from home very difficult in Mexico City. That's how we came out with the idea of what if we invent this situation in which a shared office is close enough to your house. Where close enough, think about it, in this discrete choice experiment is endogenous. People will decide what they prefer, how far they want to go, and how much money they want to give up, right? In this discrete choice experiment, and again, I'm just giving you the introduction that later on I'm going to elaborate, but I'm giving this introduction because I want to keep you in your mind the policy implication of this discrete choice experiment. In this discrete choice experiment, people, one person at a time, can tell me, I will prefer to walk 15 minutes and give up $100. And someone is going to be like, I prefer to walk 30 minutes, but I only want to give up $20, right? That's your payment. You pay with money or you will pay with time. Well, once I have the answers, what am I going to do and what are we doing? We are aggregating by neighborhood, right? Once you have that information by neighborhood, you are able to calculate the optimal location of the shared office of the office workers living in that neighborhood. And then from there, we will know how many people will want to go there every day and what will be the impact on the congestion and blah, 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 blah. You can probably at this stage infer that I am not able to do any of those other things. Well, that's where I want you to start thinking on the discrete choice experiment as this beautiful tool that can get you as far. What will be the output of your discrete choice experiment? And who will be using it to do what? In this case, I have the proportion of people per, it's not neighborhood to tell you the truth, it's per, it's bigger than neighborhood given the sample size. That wants to go 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour. And how much are they valuing their time? With that, I gave that information to my colleague who is, I never know how to say, logistics optimizer person. You know, the people who know how to design routes of transportation, who is working with those numbers to know where should we locate those shared offices to maximize the welfare of the office workers in Mexico, right? So I'm describing it very slowly because I like to brag about my research agenda, of course, but also because I want you to understand the steps. You are going to design a discrete choice experiment. You are going to have very clear what comes out from the discrete choice experiment. And you have to have very clear who is going to take those as inputs in their modeling to take you together where. We want to meet with the office, government office in charge of labor, environment, and transportation to see if they are interested on this type of policy. My colleague in Mexico, who is also an economist, with whom we published this paper, he just identified the right context. Right now, the Mexican governor, the Mexico City governor, she's very interested in this policy that she calls, I forgot the name, but she basically is developing these meetings to imagine the futures. That probably is the closest translation. And then my colleague told me, you know what, that could be the excuse. Why not we tell her that those meetings should happen around here? If she wants people to reimagine the future of their neighborhoods, we should tell them, what if part of that reimagining your neighborhood includes a share office here? Will that be something that interests you? And you know, we are just shooting to the air, but that's where I would like you to also shoot. Imagine your policies to tackle big problems, and then think how you could take it step by step. This is one step. We are going to be discussing, and right now I am going that big because I want to give you that connection between discrete choice experiment, preferences, policies. I am not going to pretend that the discrete choice experiment is going to be the only tool that you need to learn to inform policies. But I want to believe that it's a very important tool that is going to give you an idea of where are people thinking, what are they thinking, where they want to go. And with that, if you are very clever, you are going to try to use those as inputs in those policies. Questions? Reactions? No? Okay. You don't have to, but as we move on, you probably have to start thinking on your own discrete choice experiment, and I will be very happy if one of you react and say, okay, my discrete choice experiment more or less is looking like this, or my topic is like this. Another thing I want to emphasize with this exercise is that this exercise, if you realize, has to do with transportation. It has to do with value of time. It has to do with environment if we actually take it to the level of that design of optimal networks, right? It has almost to do also with energy, because at some point, if you were going to design those shared offices, you will want them to be energy efficient, right? So the topic can be as big and as related to climate change as you want it. Right now, I am encouraging you to think very interdisciplinary. And then in the way you start thinking, what colleagues are you going to be inviting to the conversation, because you cannot do this by yourself. You are only an economist. I usually come to the conversation and I say, people present themselves, well, I am a biologist, and then later on I did a master in blah, blah, and then I did a PhD in forestry. And then I start by saying, I am only an economist, because my bachelor is economics, my PhD is economics, I am only an economist. But you should be very good at thinking how you can inform all those policies, because those colleagues that have all the solutions don't know what people are thinking, don't know what people prefer. And therefore, their solutions require your tools. Okay, a good discrete choice experiment, you probably can infer it from here, and because several of you are economists, already are intuitively saying it or thinking it, but we need to say it aloud. A good discrete choice experiment presents people with trade-offs. If you go and read some applications in the psychological literature, for instance, they call discrete choice experiments, and they present something similar. But my main criticism to psychological applications is that they are not presenting people to trade-offs. They're presenting them to only improvements. What do you prefer between a scenario 1 and a scenario 2, where both of them are improvements in all three attributes? That is not a discrete choice experiment. A discrete choice experiment has to have something that you prefer, for instance, being closer home, potentially having a bike to go home, and something that you dislike so much, giving up your money. That is a trade-off. If you don't think on discrete choice experiment that clearly have a trade-off, you are not doing a good discrete choice experiment. But here is the good news for those of you who may want to engage in this type of thinking. The main criticism that my colleagues that are not economists have for economists is that we only think on money. We only think on money. And go and see the applications in economics, and of course, 99% of the applications are how much will you give up of your money in exchange for blah, blah, blah. And 1 to 2% of them are how much of your time will you be willing to give up for this or for that. But because we are economists, we know that time is that time is money, so we translate whatever you are willing to give up in time to money easily by knowing how much you will be making in 1 hour of salary. No? So we are thinking only on money. But I am very happy to have found one application that I think is a good illustration of a good trade-off that doesn't have money. And it's not random that I found it with colleagues in psychology, who are the ones who are very unwilling to put money in their discrete choice experiments. So we were in this context. Let me tell you the context. And again, all this storyline is so that you start thinking on your public policies, okay? Or who is going to be your end user? Because that is going to define your attributes. And that is going to define the structure of your discrete choice experiment. So they approached me and they said, hey, they're from Switzerland. When I did my postdoc there, we had a very good relationship, so we keep working together. And they said, look, we have the opportunity to do a discrete choice experiment in this neighborhood of Basel, which is a city in Switzerland. And the neighborhood is kind of in the middle, in an area where they want to have more urban green, but they don't have where to get more urban green. Does that sound familiar? A lot of the literature, even in economics, but also in environmental psychology and other areas, talk about increasing urban green and how beautiful is urban green and how everyone should have more green. And I always wonder, yeah, but where are we going to get the green in Mexico City, in the neighborhood where I grew up? Well, the cool thing when they approached me was, they said, there is this neighbor association who already came out with 3 potential measures to increase the green in a context where there is no land to increase the green. But they have been discussing, and they think that some people will be willing to reallocate parking spaces so that instead of parking cars, you will put trees. They are willing, some of them are willing to give up their building facades. And some of them think that we should reduce the lane so that it only becomes 1 lane, actually like a S lane. And we put green, we put trees. With the great advantage that if the cars go slow also, not only we have more green, but also it's more safe it's safer for people walking. At the very beginning, I didn't realize I should say. So I said, okay, that's beautiful. We need to put the money, right? Like any economist, I thought, well, sure. Now the question should be, how much of urban green do you want more in your neighborhood? And how much you are willing to exchange for this? And money. And my psychology colleagues opposed it, and they said, no. Why will they be giving up money if they are already giving up space? And that's when it hit me. This is a beautiful trade-off, right? And more when you realize people really value their parking spaces in those cities, right? In these cities and in Mexico City, having a parking spot is like having gold. So that's when I gave up the suggestion of putting money. Because this is a good discrete choice experiment because it truly is presenting people with trade-offs and it doesn't have money. And I will be talking about it in the coming days. I just wanted to put it there as an example, but just a little piece. People of these three, what do you think they were more willing to give up and less willing to give up? Parking space, facade, or lane? Who will you think? If we were going to implement this in your neighborhood, what will be the one that they will not want to give up easily or the least easily? And which one will be the one that they will be willing to give up the most easily?
I think speed and lane reductions in low-paid areas might be the one option that people will be more willing to give up. I mean, it's also like a very personal trade-off to make. So, as you said, in a congested city like Metro City or even certain parts of Delhi, giving up a parking space is also like losing a part of land, which is very crucial to you, especially if you own more than one car.
Exactly.
So, speed and lane reduction might be again something that people will be willing to give because speed not as big of an issue. But then if the lane reduction happens and also like lesser parking space and all those things as well. But yeah, I feel like relocating parking spaces would be the one thing that you would be less willing to give. Same with the building facade.
My hypothesis was that they will be more willing to give facade. I thought that should be the easy one. And then I thought parking space for sure they will not give with me. But you got it right in the one that sheet they got. They were more willing to give up lanes. Among other things, because in the context of that neighborhood, and you said it right, here I think that it will intersect with parking. But in that neighborhood, they have specific places for parking that are not on the lanes, or on the road. So when you give up road, you don't give up parking. But the one that really surprised me was they were not happy about giving up facade. That really blew my mind. But then later on, knowing more about the context, because again, I am only the economist, so I do the survey and I do the analysis and throw the results. I need context. And that is what I am going to emphasize about the mixed method approach of this. This cannot be a regular regression. Don't treat it as a regular regression. You cannot come up with the conclusions and say, well, therefore, they don't like to give up facades. Talk to your colleagues who are in the field and who are in the field doing the semi-structured interviews, but also that are in other scientific fields. And that's when I understood what happens is they are very attached to the historical value of their facades. Either real, but in this case, mostly perceived. And that's where psychology and economists have to talk. Because strictly speaking, it's not like it is the most historical neighborhood. But they feel so proud of kind of by association being part of the historical or the pretty neighborhoods that they didn't want to give up their facades. Right? So I want to emphasize that kind of conversation that this type of studies give you the opportunity. If you design your discrete choice experiments in conversation with your other colleagues, when you run your regressions and come up with the conclusions, go and talk again with them to say, how do we make sense of this? And then that's where I learned values, whether we like it or not, really are influenced by psychology, right? They perceive it as important, even when if you come with an objective measure of how historical their facades are, it's not like, wow. But if they perceive it, they perceive it. If they assign more value to facade than to parking spaces, that was pretty good result. And we are in the writing of the paper. So one other thing in this case is, give me a second, I was going to tell you. Oh yeah. In these two examples, I want to emphasize how do you come out, and then this is what I will say is starting to really slowly but surely going into the method. One of the important questions you should be asking right now is, so how do you come up with the attributes? Actually, I have not even defined attributes, right? An attribute is one of those characteristics that are presented here in parallel, sorry, in vertical. We call attributes those characteristics. The characteristics that they have to trade, or the characteristics that define the good that you are trying to sell in this simulated market. Those are attributes. And then every value, every level, we call it level, that each attribute take, right? You have to decide the attributes and the levels of those. The question that you should be asking yourself is, how do I do that? Why is that I didn't put 20 more? That, or in this one, believe me, this is very simple. And that was one of the comments of the reviewer, of the editor. This is too simple. You are not considering all the important things in the decision. And the trade-off is you could do it as realistic as you want, but then it's going to be 40 attributes, right? Who of us can mentally manage comparing goods over 40 attributes? So defining the number and the attributes in a specific and their levels is a qualitative exercise. There is absolutely no quantitative skill there. You have to go and do semi-structured interviews. And this is so new for some of the econometricians. Again, I don't know exactly your profile, but I do know the profile of my classmates when I was in my bachelor. And then when I was in my PhD, most of those didn't know about semi-structured interviews or focus groups. And most of us thought that that was a joke. If you don't run a regression and comes in the coefficients, then you are talking bananas. Well, in this method, if you don't do your semi-structured interviews and your focus groups to identify out of the 20 relevant attributes that you first identified through literature review, which one are you going to keep? Then you are not doing a good job, because what happens is that then you implement your discrete choice experiment and the regression is not going to lie. It's going to say, no one pay attention to this attribute. There is a literature, a very technical literature, the non-attendance attribute, that I personally have a very specific opinion. Because if your discrete choice experiment is telling you that people didn't pay attention to the attribute, it's because you did not design your discrete choice experiment correctly. Ideally, you are putting all the attributes that matter to most of the people, because you did your focus groups and your semi-structured interviews well. So that is the first thing that you should be already learning right now here. One, once you identify your question, go and do literature review to see what attributes have been considered in the previous literature, in the previous studies, and do semi-structured interviews in the context where you are going to do your study, to see which attributes people are thinking that probably were not identified in other literature, in previous literature, and which one of those that were identified in previous literature matter in the context that you are implementing. And then later on, you have to pilot to see if people more or less react to all your attributes. So for instance, I don't have the other instance here. Let me see. No, okay, I'm going to talk about other instances later. So that's how you will come to a design of this type. Literature review, semi-structured interviews, focus groups, based on your question. Okay? Questions on your side. Do you need a break? Do I need a break? When do we take a break officially?
Yeah, maybe about 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. Very good. So
If you want, you can have 10 minutes of question answer.
yeah, let's open the floor now. Questions? Yes.
When you spoke about identifying the attributes,
Yes.
So you spoke about identifying the attributes from the literature and then going on the ground, having the focus discussion, and then also identifying the new attributes. And then you spoke that, and you go on the ground again to do a pilot and see if how the people react. So,
Exactly.
uh, how do you explain like how do how do they as in react? As in you ask some questions or like what?
Thank you. Very good question. I can gather probably one more and then maybe try to see if I answer it both. Yes? Oh, are you? Oh. I didn't mind walking. It's a good exercise.
Thank you, sir, for this presentation. So this is a very new topic to me. So first, I wanted to understand that. So we also take the survey of the people that what they want, what the choices are. So how is it different from that? And second question is that you talked about that people perceive certain value to some things. So if so, does there is a pre-experiment or pre-pilot kind of like pre-survey? Wouldn't it be better to provide such choices that they can more willing to give up or take?
Yeah.
So how do you do
Mhm.
that?
The first question, can you repeat the first question again?
First question is that we also do survey for knowing the choices that what people like or what people want. So how this is different from that, or is like is the same incorporating different methods or what? Yes.
So my question is, you said about we are selecting the attributes, right? So you showed 4 attributes you have selected. So my question is, did you start with 40 and then you went to 4? Because if you start with 40 and then you can apply like an PSM, like principal component analysis or something like that, and then you can select on to the 4, then you can know these are the main variables which are important. Because how can I know without going and like selecting a list of things? Because the person who I will be interviewing, he will not know the context directly, like these are important. That I need to identify like these are the 40 questions may be important, then I can cut it down and come to 4 or 5. So is that the process?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go over it. I think that Sangita had a question. Yeah. Did you want to participate?
Yeah. So my question was that the reason we include prices as one of the attribute is because we want something that has a uniform unit, and we can convert everything in willingness to pay. So in your psychology example, I mean, so how do we
Yeah,
go about
that's a
it?
good question. I want to. Okay. Yes. Why, okay. Let me answer. Is it related?
Yes, related.
Okay, if it is related, yeah, so that I answer them. It's more or less also about that part. Yeah. Yeah, we can give her the.
So my question was basically about like the ideal. So when we're talking about these decision choices, and in one of these situations, at least in one of them, all the attributes align to something that is ideally what we want. Ideally, like if we were talking about transportation itself, there is a transport like expert who's doing the planning who knows that this probably makes the most sense in whatever urban planning center they have. So my question, and I did last semester, I did a geography paper that like talked about multiple choice decision making models, and like so many different ones over there. And I believe I can't remember exactly, but there was one that specifically talked about like an ideal situation. How do you reach the ideal situation? So do you also try to find that, like when you're doing a multidisciplinary research, do you have one option that's like the ideal, and then you go on with the rest?
Okay. Did you have a question?
So I think all questions are about
Mhm.
attributes, and I think my colleague also has a similar question: that how do you choose
Mhm.
how many options and how many attributes?
Yeah. I think that one more there, and then we go for answer. Hit in the right. Oh, okay. Sorry. We will have more opportunity for you.
Good afternoon. My question is, while we are choosing the attributes, there could be some personal bias also. Like some attributes we feel are good, and we might try to convince the person who is the respondent, and we might give emphasis to certain attributes while doing our survey. So how do we make sure that this doesn't happen?
Yeah. Okay. So I should say that today. Yeah. I'm glad that there are questions. I'm glad that there are questions. That is a good. That's always good.
Sir, my question is about that both the choice experiments that you showed us. So every attribute have a particular number of alternatives, and all the alternatives are same. Like there are two alternatives in all the attributes. So like, is it
You are
so?
a little bit ahead. You are asking about the design. How do we create the options, right? You want to know. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. I'm going to definitely answer that question because it's one important component. Get me. I think that we are going to make a little bit of that today, but mostly tomorrow.
Okay, done.
But definitely, you want to know. So how do I come up with those alternatives? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right now, we are going to be deepening a little bit more on attributes and levels, and then a little bit today, but mostly tomorrow, we are going to be discussing. So how do we create these alternatives that we are going to be presenting? Okay. Let me answer this, and then we still have a few hours to. Oh, there is a micro there. Okay. I keep chasing the micro. Yeah.
My question was actually regarding something that our professors keep pointing out in class whenever we are reading papers. So they say that whenever you are like undertaking a research that's supposed to inform policy, you should see if the experiment is actually externally valid. And making a DC externally valid seems like a huge task because it will be really expensive to do it at that scale. So how is that issue addressed if we want to like we want our research to inform policy?
That's an excellent question. The last two questions, your and your question, I am going to elaborate tomorrow. But if you could, and if all of you could, one of the papers that I put in the list is the paper on the transportation journal. The paper reporting this experiment is with my colleague Lara Pulido Lara. Go to the section of policy conversations, and please read it because that's where we do the attempt to do external validity checking. And I point out that one because I am very proud of reporting one number there that comes from reveal preferences. Because what you just said really touches a very important point. But read that part of that paper, everyone, if possible. And the other one, the working paper with Charu and Sangeeta, also the policy component, where we related to the work by Blackman. Read those two, because those are going to show you how we aim for external validity, because that's a big challenge for these studies. Okay. And we are going to go back. So if at some point again you see me wandering on studies, bring me back to that question and to your question, please. Okay, so in terms of design, what I'm about to tell you is the idea. If you ask me or my colleagues how much of the idea, sometimes we do or we don't. In practice, it's difficult to go step by step or to not make mistakes. But here is what I have learned over the years. A good, if you're a PhD student, I think that this can be a 1 year process. You can divide it in 1 year. And then the first month and a half, 2 months, I will heavily dedicate it to literature review, where you will be searching for contexts in which they did something similar or something identical, and you will be listing all the attributes that they consider. Then I will go to fill those with semi-structured interviews. Ideally, 10 semi-structured interviews. 10 semi-structured interviews with people who are very much engaged in the topic. So for instance, if you want to do something like what Charu did for her PhD, you can go and talk to people who are thinking on buying a car. And you want to start very open. So I know that you are in the market right now trying to buy a car. What characteristics are you considering? What are the criteria that you are considering? What are the most, once they come out with 10, with 20, with whatever they come out, you say, well, and what are the most important when it comes to really, really nailing it? Because of course, someone is going to say color. Let me tell you, when it comes to money, when they tell you, is this model in white, and it costs 20,000 cheaper, you go for that, right? Even when you don't love the color. At least I know of people who do that, and I have done that. So color doesn't go. At the very beginning, people are going to give you 20 attributes. Then you have to go and say, so when it comes to really, really in the end, what are going to be the 5 ones that really matter for you? No, but these ones, okay. Now I am putting the example of Charu because of the following. Many of the times in research, we are interested, for instance, on attributes that reflect efficiency in the energy use. And if you do this semi-structured interview, this is a very good example, because if you do the literature review and you list the attributes in the literature review, 95%, 99% of the papers are going to be considering energy efficient attributes. And now go and do the semi-structured interviews. How many people do you really think that they are, oh yeah, I want to be considering the efficiency of the car heavily? Unfortunately, at least for the case of Mexico, very few. So that is where you put your bias. Who talk about biases? Your bias becomes, I always say to my students that it's okay to be biased. What is not okay is to be unconscious of your biasness, because actually, if you think about it, your research questions always are going to reflect a bias to begin with. Kind of your wish. You kind of wish that people are paying attention to energy efficiency. So there you say, okay, for the 20 and then the 5 that you mentioned to me, have you ever considered fuel efficiency? Well, yeah, sure. And then you explain, well, fuel efficiency is kind of important because it actually gives you savings depending on the use that you provide, right? And then people kind of start thinking in those terms. But if you think about it, many of the cases that we do are going to explicitly or implicitly introduce the bias of the researcher, or the wishes, practically. And that is a good example. Many people are not thinking on efficiency when they are buying cars or appliances or many other things that researchers are thinking on. And that also has to do with technical innovations or solutions to climate change, for those of you who might be interested in those type of topics. Farmers might or might not be thinking on water efficiency. You might try to be selling this technology that uses water efficiently, and they don't have it in their radar. Keep in mind the following term that we are going to introduce in the coming days: a split sample. Because to me, in the context of discrete choice experiments, designing a good split sample is the way to give a space to your bias, or to your research question, or to your wish. So the split sample is going to be half of the people you are going to present it to a discrete choice experiment that comes from literature review, for instance. And half of them, you are going to tell them something that you wish make them more interested in energy efficiency. And you want to see whether it's scaring them, or motivating them, or providing information, right? Information treatments, or nudging them, will get them to be more interested in the attribute that you are considering. So I'm going to go back to the general answering of the general question. Think on a 1 year, if you are a PhD student, project. The first 2 years you do your interview, your literature review. The next month, 2 months, the first 2 months you do your literature review. The next month you do your semi-structured interviews, focus groups. The third month, you already have defined a subgroup of attributes and levels that you are going to be testing on 20 people already with this design. When you approach the semi-structured interview people, the first 10, you don't need to have this design in mind clearly, but you do need to have a list of attributes. But when you approach for the piloting, you need to approach 20, 30 people with a design in mind like this. And then there is where you are going to know. Because you are going to be running preliminary regressions analysis on that 20, 25 answers. And that's where you are going to realize no one is paying attention to bicycle. And you will have to reiterate. Maybe if you are very interested in keeping it, maybe you rephrase it. Maybe you go and see if there is another way to present it. Or if you are not that interested, you thought it was just part of what it could be, you drop it. And if people in that piloting tells you, I kind of wish you put this thing, this attribute, you will have to consider, should I bring back one attribute that I didn't consider at this stage? And then you will need to pilot one more time, right? So by the 6th month, you should have ready the one that you are going to implement.